Okay, greetings, welcome. This is the European Peace Museum and the Musée des Muses. We're in Bétet in France, so I'm inviting you in on a little tour of the museum. Come in, please, and I'll explain everything when we're inside. Yes, welcome. If you'd like to come in here. So greetings, hello. This is the entrance to the European Peace Museum. We still have the Christmas tree up, but it's coming down today. So I'd like to welcome you on this little tour. There are two things going on here. Firstly, it's a European Peace Museum, and it's the only European Peace Museum, which is ridiculous. There ought to be one in every country. There are some peace museums. There's one in Bradford, there's one in Austria. The European Union have just created a European History Museum in Brussels, which is a good thing. And I have worked with museums running exhibitions and so on. So what we have in this museum are objects from, all over the world to do with peace. Everything from visual objects to physical things. We have a piece of the Berlin Wall. We have the Druid's sword of the Peace Druids of Europe, and many sacred objects. It's also the Musée des Muses here. So this is a museum, it's unique, it's the only one in the world, dedicated to the 9 Muses, who were the goddesses of learning, knowledge, education and wisdom in the philosophical traditions of Pythagoras, Orpheus and Plato. It was an Orphic idea. The Orphic spiritual brotherhood and sisterhood were based on ancient Greek Bronze Age spirituality, which in turn go back to the old European culture that Maria Gimbutas talked about in her wonderful books on the goddess traditions. These people were inspired prophetic geniuses. Orpheus was from Thrace, which is north of Greece. It's now in Bulgaria. And these people believed in reincarnation. They believed that the purpose of life is to fulfill your soul's purpose through working out, any negative karma you have, any fears, any kind of angst that we all have. We're all born with a certain degree of angst, which, according to the Orphics, is an accumulation from past life misdeeds. We've all done stuff. The Jains agree with that, as do the Buddhists, that we have to purify that karma. So how you purify that karma for the Orphics was through song, through music, through chant, through spiritual work, through right living, through kindness, through love, through compassion. And Orpheus was the symbolic spiritual teacher who brought that to mankind. He travelled all over the Mediterranean, and so he represents that ancient wisdom of European culture and civilization. He was a proponent of peace. He spent time at Delphi, which was already ancient when Orpheus was born. He was living in about 800 BC, it's thought by scholars. And they found tombs in Bulgaria that are from that date, with sort of priest kings being buried. So after Orpheus came Pythagoras, who also worshipped the 9 Muses. And for Pythagoras, they were a symbol of learning. We are supposed to be Homo sapiens on this planet. We're supposed to be intelligent, wise, loving, compassionate. Not just cerebral intelligence, but intelligence of the heart, knowing the difference between right and wrong. Pythagoras invented the word philosophy. He was half Phoenician. He had Semitic and Indo-European ancestors. He synthesized the best of those great cultures of the Mediterranean. He was from the island of Samos, which is a beautiful island, which makes incredible wine, beautiful white wine, still to this day. And he travelled all over the Mediterranean. He spent time in Egypt. He spent time in Phoenicia, studying in the temples of his father, who was Phoenician. And it's thought he went to Babylon, where the great god Marduk was the chief god, and his consort, Sarpanit, who was a wise and beautiful goddess. And the Babylonian culture were very good at mathematics. They divided the circle into 60 degrees. They worked out the map of the heavens and first allocated it into 12 demarcation points. Their ziggurats were used for sky watching and star mapping, and all this Pythagoras learned and studied. And then he went to Egypt, and he spent time in the temples there, initiating into Egyptian wisdom, particularly in geometry. They were brilliant at geometry because of their complex land surveying that they did, and the temple buildings, the pyramids and so on. Egypt has more temples per square mile than any other country on the planet, even more than India. It was the most religious of all cultures. He spent at least 10, some say 20 years in Egypt. And then he came back to Crotona in the south of Italy, way down on the sort of the bottom shoe of Italy, and founded an academy or a spiritual centre at Crotona, where he taught philosophy. And he did it through music, through mathematics, through philosophy, through mythology, through poetry, through dance, through all the work of the Muses. And so for Pythagoras, to be a true philosopher or a sage, you have to revere the 9 Muses and the 9 fields of wisdom that they represent and embody. So that's Pythagoras. And then after him, a couple of generations later, came Plato, who was from that same lineage. Plato was an intellectual aristocrat from Athens, whose father descended from, by tradition, from Poseidon, the god of the sea, and Codrus was the first king of Athens, was Plato's ancestor. His mother, Perictione, was a great woman in her own right, and when baby Plato was born, his parents, who were very pious and believers in the mysteries of the gods, took him to a cave of Pan in the mountain above Athens, which was a sacred grotto, and they dedicated him to the service of the gods. And it said they smeared his mouth with honey and lit candles in honour of the gods. And bees appeared, and it was a sign from the gods that this man, this little baby, would be honoured with eloquence, which is what happened. He became one of the greatest writers in the history of the world. His dialogues put in dramatic form the discussions that took place with Socrates and his circle of savants in ancient Athens. Plato never even once mentions himself in the dialogues. It's the most incredible work he did. He records what Socrates said and the other students. But he always kept in the shadows. I wrote a poem about Plato when I was visiting Crete once. When Plato was sad at the death of Socrates, who was murdered by the state, that's why philosophers have a sort of love-hate relationship with the state. We don't like force, governments, death sentences. We tend to be peace-loving people. He left Athens and he went travelling. He went to southern Italy, looking for traces of the Pythagoreans. He went to Egypt as well, like Pythagoras, and he spent time being initiated in the temples of Egypt. Everywhere he went, he tried to learn and understand what is philosophy, what is wisdom. And then eventually he came back to Athens after the heat had died down. Politics had moved on. There were more sensible people running the city. And he found some land in a forest grove just outside Athens with beautiful trees, a bit like this one. And he founded the academy. That was the first academy in European history. And as an academic myself, we should all be devotees of that original academy. I've been to the grounds of it. It's now in a park in Athens. When I was there in 2013 for the World Congress of Philosophy, we met and had lectures in the grounds of the actual academy. I've got some photos of that amazing experience. And what's so interesting about the academy is archaeologists have discovered that one of the first buildings that was put up was a temple to the 9 Muses. We found, archaeologists have discovered, it was a Norwegian and German team of archaeologists in the 19th century discovered the ruins of the Temple of the Muses. So what Plato was saying by that is, look, if you come and be an academic, you're working within this lineage going back through Pythagoras and Orpheus, back to the ancient goddess cultures of Bronze Age and Neolithic Age in old Europe. And every true scholar has to be humble, because knowledge is sacred, knowledge is divine. You can study as long as you want. I've been studying for 40 years, reading everything I can, visiting every single library I could go to. on every continent and spending hours and hours in front of books. And yet, like Newton said, the more I know how little I know. You know, that's what Plato was saying, is we should be humble with our scholarship. Instead of sort of too many academics are quite arrogant, they know some little thing and then they police it like a sort of trench warfare. That's not academics, that's something else. So this Centre of Peace Studies is devoted to authentic academic research into the nature of peace, which I think is the most important thing we're all lacking. On this planet we don't have a shortage of food and water and clothing and shelter and land. Huge tracts of land are uninhabited. They could be peopled. Some people grumble and say the population's too vast. No, the planet is, you know, vast uninhabited spaces that if we were intelligent could be built with green, ecologically sustainable communities and so on. But first we have to have peace. We'll never do that until the nations of the world agree like lasting, binding peace treaties with each other, that they will not attack each other. You know, it's supposed to be there with the UN, but it's not working because, look, Putin thinks he can get away with attacking a neighbour, Ukraine, who are basically just a sisterly race, people very close to the Russians. So this centre here, welcoming you on this tour, is dedicated to making peace possible for mankind in our lifetimes. So thank you, welcome.